Do you know what this is? It's called a vocoder, a strange little hybrid of man and machine, born from war, engineered to encrypt voices, compress speech, and strip away every trace of humanity. It shreds a voice into fragments, filters it, rebuilds it, and spits it back out as something cold, calculated, and inhuman. And then the 80s happened. Suddenly, this tool of wartime secrecy was being used to make singers sound like suave androids and shoulder pads on the dance floor. Priorities, am I right? But for one character, that eerie, emotionless tone didn't make music. It made history as the voice of one of the most iconic villains of the era. No swagger, no heart, just an emotionless wave of sound. When we think back to the most memorable cartoon characters from the 80s, I'm pretty sure that our minds instantly go to the Look, that massive truck chest of Optimus Prime, the shining chrome dome of Destro, or that glorious, blazing mane of red hair on Lion-O. These were designs burned into our brains, loud, bold, and unmistakably of their time. But I would argue that just as unforgettable were the voices, the kind that lived rent-free in our heads for decades. The "Me, Grimlock" caveman bravado of, well, Grimlock, the shrieking tyranny of Cobra Commander, or how about the laid-back, snack-fueled drawl of Shaggy, peppered with just a hint of America's Top 40 flair. These weren't just voices, they were the characters, echoing through Saturday mornings, playground reenactments, and every epic living room battle, or in Shaggy's case, midnight munchie session. Just kidding. Remember what Nancy said? Just say no. Sorry. Yet, among all that screaming and over-the-top theatrics, one voice didn't bother with emotion at all. It didn't plead, it didn't rant, it didn't perform, it just delivered. And that voice belonged to the Decepticon communications officer, Soundwave, Megatron's most trusted lieutenant, ranked right there beside Starscream and Shockwave, except he never challenges Megatron's authority. Silent, monotone, unreadable. Soundwave is as cold as a muted dial tone, but behind that stillness is a master manipulator who's earned his place through ruthless efficiency and impossible to ignore usefulness. Famously said to be able to hear a fly sneeze, Soundwave can detect the faintest signal or the quietest whisper of treachery. His sensors are so powerful that they can pick up electrical brain impulses, letting him read minds at close range. Add to that his photographic memory and habit of collecting every bit of intel for future leverage, and almost every Decepticon tightens up the moment he walks into the room. But his voice and eerie presence is just really half the story of what makes Soundwave superior. In combat, Soundwave's real firepower isn't the concussion blaster on his shoulder, it's the arsenal inside his chest. A private army of Laserbeak, Ravage, Rumble, Frenzy, Buzzsaw, and more. Each one a capable spy, enforcer, or ruthless accountant. Together, they make Soundwave the most well-armed and well-connected con in the entire war. And yet, he never wields that power for personal gain. In a faction built on backstabbing, blackmail, and calculated betrayals, Soundwave is the one Decepticon whose loyalty to Megatron has never once wavered. If you want to know exactly where his allegiance lies, just listen to one of the most iconic and unchanging lines in Transformers history.
As you command, Megatron.
Anyway, like a lot of kids in the 80s, the very first time I met Soundwave was in the 3-part miniseries More Than Meets the Eye, where he made his grand debut as a Cybertronian lamppost. No, really. Not the strongest first impression, but give it a few seconds and he's back to doing what he does best, deploying Laserbeak in that vocoder-drenched voice of his to spy on the Autobots. And if that wasn't enough to win you over, he quickly showed that he was too hard to handle in a fight, effortlessly taking down Prowl, Jazz, and Sideswipe before getting blindsided by Ironhide. But after getting knocked down, he gets back up again and jams Ratchet's head into a control panel like it was nothing. Yeah, after that, I was in. Once they land on Earth though, Soundwave really starts flexing. He's cranking out energon cubes like an industrial espresso machine and sicking his cassette crew on the good guys. Laserbeak blasts Hound off a cliff, Ravage terrorizes some random humans, and Rumble starts shaking the literal foundations of Sherman Dam, starting up a tidal wave. And here's what I always loved. Every time Soundwave launched a cassette, he'd call it out by name and mission.
Operation Assimilation. Operation Destruction. Operation Tidal Wave.
An extra kudos to him for doing a little arm wave motion when he said it. Sorry, but style points are real. Between that voice, those cassettes, and that weird hypnotic calm, I'm pretty sure that Soundwave shot up to the top of many kids' favorites lists. He was a constant, competent fixture at Megatron's side, right up into Transformers the movie in 1986. And thankfully, unlike fellow OGs like Skywarp, Thundercracker, and even Starscream, Soundwave didn't die. He unleashed his tapes for
Operation Interference.
and jammed Blaster's SOS transmission to Cybertron during the siege of Autobot City, and scooped up a near-dead Megatron off the battlefield, hauling him into Astro Train during the Decepticons' strategic withdrawal. Loyalty, man. But wait, since he was mentioned, let's talk about Blaster for a bit. Soundwave's Autobot counterpart, and let's be honest, a bit of a cheap imitation if you ask me. These two had some classic clashes, from their sonic showdown in the club-filled episode Autobop to dueling over a deadly three-part harmony in Carnage in C minor, where Blaster would famously get the best of Soundwave by literally pressing his buttons located in his lower regions. Ew. Anyway, while their rivalry mellowed out a bit by Season 3, it roared back in the Japanese continuation series, The Headmasters, where Soundwave and Blaster went one-on-one in a battle to the death, where both bots, well, died. But I mean, if you think about it, can a robot truly die? So yeah, it wasn't long before Blaster blued himself and returned as Twincast, and Soundwave was back in black as Sound Blaster. And while Sound Blaster would eventually take on a life of his own, that's a story for later in this video. Because right now, the story that I'd like to get into would be about Soundwave in the comics, starting with the original Marvel run. Now, at first glance, Soundwave's presence in the 80s Marvel comics doesn't really scream show stealer. He starts out where we'd expect him, loyal Decepticon communications officer, monotone, efficient, always watching, and just as in the cartoon, his tale begins with that familiar opening, tale as old as time. Autobots and Decepticons clash on Cybertron, both factions leave, they fight in space, crash on Earth, and lay dormant for millions of years. Until 1984. But from there, the comic's trajectory gets far more chaotic than the cartoon. Case in point, despite Starscream's best efforts, the animated Decepticons had Megatron at the helm for most of the series. In the comics, Decepticon leadership is treated like a Game of Thrones. We see power shift from Megatron to Shockwave, then to Ratbat, Scorponok, and even the pretender Bludgeon is thrown into the mix, each with their own distorted view of Decepticon dominance. But through all of the on-brand Decepticon backstabbing, Soundwave remains constant and never once loses his footing. And he does this not by seizing power for himself, not by fighting for it, but by quietly making himself indispensable to whoever is in charge, be it Megatron, Shockwave, Ratbat, or Charles. And because of this, Soundwave survives, not metaphorically, literally. He lives through the underbase disaster when a supercharged Starscream wipes out a plethora of Autobots and Decepticons who no longer had toys selling on the retail shelves, and he barely flinches when Unicron shows up and lays maximum carnage on Cybertron. When the original 80-issue run ends, guess who is doing his best Elton John impression and still standing? Soundwave. Quiet, calculating, unbroken. But then came 2012, when a new company, IDW, launched their own series called Regeneration 1 that picked up where the old Marvel story left off, not with a reboot but a true continuation set decades after Unicron's attack. Cybertron is thriving under the peaceful guidance of the God-forged last Autobot. War is over, Autobots and Decepticons coexist uneasily but peacefully, and that's when Soundwave finally steps into the spotlight. Soundwave is now the leader of the Neo-Decepticons, a bitter underground movement hell-bent on restarting the war, and in classic Soundwave fashion, he succeeds in a quite spectacular way, starting off the series with a literal bang, actually a crack-a-doom, as he vaporizes the last Autobot. Yup, not deactivate, not crush, vaporize. The peace era? Dunzo. It's a shocking twist for a guy who usually operates from the shadows. Soundwave leading a Decepticon uprising, acting on pure fiery ideology. Except, not really, because when Blaster finally confronts and stops him, the truth comes out. Soundwave was never in control. He was actually manipulated the whole time, a puppet of the Dark Matrix, a cosmic parasite of pure evil that, I don't really have the bandwidth to explain in detail right now. Sorry. All you need to know is that it's a bad entity, and it has Soundwave wrapped around his fingers doing its bidding. And once it fully takes over, Soundwave's arc turns from tragic to downright nightmarish. He's mutated into a grotesque conduit, absorbing his own cassettes and twisting into something monstrous. In the end, the Dark Matrix is obviously defeated, and Soundwave, along with all those under its sway, are finally freed. Not. Yeah, that was pretty much it. Punsit for Soundwave, who figuratively went down with the Dark Matrix ship. And so in the Marvel Comics, Soundwave's story pretty much ends on a low note. Not exactly a satisfying send-off for such a pivotal character. Thankfully, that wasn't his only story. When IDW launched their own Transformers universe in 2005, they seized the chance to reimagine characters from the ground up. And among all their fresh takes, Soundwave stands out, not just as a redefined version of the classic Decepticon, but as I think one of the most nuanced and compelling portrayals he's ever received. In this new continuity, Soundwave is introduced not as the stoic, whisper-voiced strategist fans know, but as an outcast, born with the overwhelming telepathic abilities that made life unbearable. He was driven to the brink of madness on a Cybertron that neither understood nor helped him. That changed when he met Ravage, Buzzsaw, and Laserbeak, outcasts themselves due to their bestial forms. Together, these animals gave Soundwave structure and purpose, teaching him to channel the chaos inside his mind. Their bond wasn't just tactical, it was foundational. Unfortunately, Soundwave's abilities brought him to the attention of corrupt powers. Senator Ratbat, yes, he was a senator before becoming a literal bat, reshaped him into a living weapon, a psychic tool and physical platform for cassette units. But everything shifted when Soundwave met Megatron, then a lowly gladiator fighting for survival and, more importantly, dreaming of change. One mind link later, and Soundwave found someone whose ideals of equality and liberation resonated deeply. Megatron wasn't just a leader, he was a frequency that finally made sense. As the Decepticon movement grew, Soundwave helped build its spine. He recruited key allies like Starscream, Thundercracker, and Skywarp, assisted in Shockwave's return, and played a pivotal role in the Senate uprising that sparked the war. On a more personal note, he ripped out Ratbat's brain and jammed it into a cassette body. It wasn't just symbolism, it marked the end of one era and the start of another. But revolutions tend to take on lives of their own. Over time, the Decepticon cause drifted from ideology to domination. Soundwave saw it happening. He defended the core principles he believed in, even as figures like Starscream and Shockwave twisted them to their own uses. But through it all, Soundwave stuck to what he believed was the true spirit of the Decepticon cause. always ready to carry out whatever mission his leader Megatron assigned. The first major one, travel to Earth to spy on Bludgeon. This was way back in 1984, so Soundwave chose the perfect alt mode for stealth, a Walkman. Unfortunately, the unprecedented portability, ability to listen to personalized music on the go, and overall commercial success of his new alt mode wasn't enough to keep him hidden. Bludgeon caught him, froze him in tape deck mode, and buried him deep beneath a volcano for over 2 decades. Eventually, Soundwave was recovered and returned to Megatron's side as his leader went full-on all-hail Megatron and launched a total assault on the Earth, which Megatron promptly lost. With his leader sidelined, Soundwave focused on keeping him alive, and with Shockwave's help, ultimately rebuilt him into a Megatron. Like seriously, this guy looked like he stepped out of a Tron movie. Cool look though. With the band back together, Megatron alongside Shockwave and Soundwave hatched a plan to use parts of his old body to make Megatron gun replicas that could subconsciously influence humans to reignite Decepticon control. It went about as well as you'd expect. Badly, with Optimus Prime shooting Soundwave right in the face. But Soundwave survived. Physical damage? Occupational hazard. What truly rattled him was philosophical. Case in point, what do you do when your leader, your North Star, the embodiment of everything you believe in, Megatron, joins the Autobots? Lost, Soundwave is approached by Galvatron, who in this universe is a completely separate character. Galvatron pitches himself as a restorer of Decepticon glory, conveniently leaving out that his idea of glory meant conquest and domination. In time, Soundwave broke away and focused on something more meaningful, founding Sanctuary Station, a peaceful Decepticon haven orbiting Jupiter, all while maintaining uneasy alliances with humans. And speaking of being in league with humans, with no Megatron and Galvatron exposed, Soundwave found himself working with, of all mechs, Optimus Prime. And it was Prime who challenged him to step outside his biases and read a human mind. Soundwave did, Operation Inception, and it changed him. He realized humans weren't inferior, just different, alive, emotional, complex. It was a turning point that realigned his principles without erasing his identity. And speaking of turning points, if you are regulars to this channel, I think we've reached a turning point where it's time to take things to the next level and for you to try out my channel membership. As a friend of the Toy Shelf, you will get shoutouts in every video, enjoy early access, exclusive content, and even input on future stories. All for less than a measly $1. All you gotta do is click on the join button on the homepage and you're in. But as always, whichever way you choose to help out will be greatly appreciated, so thank you. From then on, Soundwave became less of a soldier of conquest and more of a thoughtful ambassador to the original Decepticon ideals: equality, unity, resistance. His final act during the war against Unicron was also his most profound. Using the enigma of combination and his telepathy, Soundwave united the sparks and emotions of every Cybertronian that came before to empower Optimus Prime's final stand. It worked, but it cost him everything. Soundwave's body disintegrated into nothingness. His last broadcast was a single calm phrase: Operation Absolution. Soundwave never removed the Decepticon badge. He kept it, not as a mark of war, but as a symbol of belief. In the end, he became the closest thing to what the Decepticons were meant to be: a force driven by purpose, not conquest. I mean, it feels fitting that the actual Decepticon symbol appears to be roughly based on Soundwave's head, don't you think? Like I said, this might be the best version of Soundwave we've ever seen, at least for me. But it's definitely not the only one. Over the years, we've gotten several very different takes on Soundwave. 3 in particular stand out to me, and I'd like to talk about them. One good, one great, and one, well, I'll let you be the judge. First up, the good. the Transformers animated Soundwave from 2007 has got to have one of the most unique origins in the franchise. He begins as a toy, brought to life by the power of the Allspark. But this wasn't random, it was part of Megatron's plan to build himself a new body. But the plan didn't just backfire, it evolved. Instead of becoming a vessel for Megatron, Soundwave gained full sentience and adopted an ideology of robotic superiority. Believing machines should rule over humans, Soundwave leads a robot uprising and hijacks machinery citywide. Though ultimately defeated and reduced to a Walkman because Easter egg, Soundwave escapes and makes one more return in a later episode, trapping the Autobots as humans in their own virtual insanity, and now showing off his deadly keytar skills with his buddy Ratbat. Fortunately, Prime is able to wrangle in Laserbeak and takes on Soundwave in a sonic showdown, ending when Prime literally uses his guitar, axe, to split Soundwave in half. But don't worry, kiddies. Soundwave survives and lives to fight another day. While Animated's take on Soundwave wasn't exactly the deepest version out there, I'll give credit where credit is due. It was original, entertaining, and definitely had some creepy Chucky-style evil toy comes alive vibes going for it. But if we're talking creepy Soundwave, we have to move on to the great Soundwave from 2010's Transformers Prime. This is one of the most radical takes on the character ever. Visually, he's a definite departure. Slim, silent, visor-faced with long bat-like arms. Eerie before he even moves. But that unsettling presence is the point. In this series, Soundwave is Megatron's most trusted operative, a quiet, ever-watchful master of surveillance and sabotage. His drone plane alt mode makes perfect sense for a character who is always monitoring, always tracking, and he's still paired up with Laserbeak, now as an integrated scout unit. Yes, a drone with a drone sounds redundant, but whatever. And don't let his lanky, fragile look frame fool you. When cornered, this Soundwave fights like a horror movie creature, unleashing alien-like tentacles to overpower even the toughest Autobots, including a sword-wielding wrecker like Wheeljack. Tentacles. Because, of course, the creepiest guy in the show would also have those. Soundwave hacks global networks, shuts down enemies with surgical precision, and even blackmails fellow Decepticons by playing back their own duplicities to remind them he's always listening. Across the show, he speaks just once.
Soundwave superior. Autobots inferior.
And after that, silence. Creepy, loyal, unrelenting. This Soundwave isn't just a character, he's a living shadow with a mission, and it works beautifully. What doesn't work quite as beautifully, though, is Soundwave from the live-action Transformers movies. After an unspectacular appearance as a satellite in Revenge of the Fallen, where he literally poops Ravage into the Earth's orbit, Soundwave makes his proper on-screen debut in the third film, Dark of the Moon. He joins a beaten Megatron in Africa, before heading off undercover in his new vehicle mode, a Mercedes-Benz. Sleek, stylish, and unfortunately not much like Soundwave. To his credit, he does retain one unsettling trait from the awesome Prime version: tentacles, multiple elongated appendages that he uses to hack satellites and terrorize pretty captive women inside him. Yeah, that doesn't sound quite right, but I mean, what else would you expect from Michael Bay? All that aside though, my biggest problem was that this version barely feels like Soundwave. Yes, he's got Laserbeak and Ravage, and yes, he's loyal to Megatron, but that's where the resemblance ends. Gone is the calculating strategist or ominous observer. Instead, we get a generic thug who turns into a generic car. No intelligence, no unique presence, nothing that says Soundwave. And to top it all off, he's taken out quite quickly and unceremoniously at the end of the movie by Bumblebee in the Battle of Chicago. Head blown off. No dramatic payoff, no gravitas, just gone. Honestly, I'd take Marvel's tragic Dark Matrix corruption demise over this disappointing exit any day. Thankfully though, what wasn't quite disappointing were the numerous Soundwave toys that have been released through the years. I mean, in his purest form, the guy basically transforms into a box, so how could you really mess that up? And right out of the gate, Hasbro, or I guess to be more accurate, Takara, produced a winner. Originally released in Japan as part of Takara's micro-change toy line, the MC-10 Cassette Man would be then brought over to the US and repackaged as the Decepticon Communications Officer Soundwave. And while he didn't transform into a car, jet, or a gun, I would argue that he, along with his cassette buds Ravage, Frenzy, Rumble, Laserbeak, and Buzzsaw, the last of which came packed in with the Soundwave, were the real stars of that first wave of Transformers released in 1984. I mean, he certainly outlasted most of his contemporaries in retail shelves, which pretty much ensured that he would survive past the 1986 animated movie. The next significant Soundwave toy released would be in 1990, and as great as the original Soundwave toy was, Action Master Soundwave wasn't. Yeah, gone was his ability to transform as well as his awesome gimmick for deploying tape warriors. Instead, the guy came with added articulation and some winged thing. No, really, that was his name, Wing Thing, a little orange bat companion that did all the transforming for this dude into his weapon. I mean, yeah, I know nowadays non-transforming Transformers are the shits and all, but back then it just felt pretty lame. And what followed after that were just a bunch of non-related toys that just carried the name Soundwave. Novelty items like this tiny version of Soundwave, awful diaper crotch versions, and, well, reissues of the OG toy. It wouldn't be until 2007 that I feel we got our first unique Soundwave as part of Takara's music label line that featured a Soundwave that transformed into an actual working MP3 player. But as cool as that was, this sort of touched on a major problem for Soundwave toys moving forward, as by this time, his traditional alt mode, the Walkman, was no longer in production. So yeah, I mean, granted Soundwave the character was iconic as they come, how do you sell a Transformer toy to kiddies that has an alt mode that is obsolete? Well, simple. Have him transform into something else. Duh. In 2005, Soundwave made an impressive debut as a stealth bomber for the Transformers Cybertron line, which I thought was cool. But what really got me excited was the evil toy turned robot rights rabble-rouser, say that 10 times fast, Soundwave from Transformers Animated, who would get his first toy in 2008 that transformed into a truck with analog detailing, so yeah. But I think the real star of this toy was Laserbeak, who, like in the show, transformed into a guitar that this dude could wield for some transformative metal thrashing. A later black repaint came with his Keytar of Doom Ratbat. Talk about instruments of destruction, am I right? Anyway, ultimately, I get it. You either love or hate the whole animated aesthetic, but come on, how can you not say this toy rocks? The real genius here, though, is how Hasbro was able to accurately translate this very stylized design into a fun and functional toy. I mean, those designers were really bringing in their A game. And they also brought it when it came to the toy for the Transformers Prime Soundwave, giving us a really faithful plastic rendition of that really creepy design in 2012, transforming into his sleek drone plane, complete with Laserbeak, who fits seamlessly in both bot and alt mode. But dialing it back a bit, Hasbro also gave us Cybertronian mode Soundwaves that, no, didn't transform into a lamppost, but into some alien-looking truck thing with like jaws. There was a basic version in 2010, and then an upgraded one in 2012 that could even deploy minions, now reimagined as data discs. Anyway, by 2013, the whole masterpiece line of Transformers was in full swing, and it was time for Soundwave to make his inevitable debut in the line. And despite all the interesting alt modes he had since been, there were no ifs or buts about this one. Obsolescence be damned, a masterpiece version of Soundwave would have to transform into a Walkman. And so it did. And as far as masterpieces go, MP13 would go down as one of the best masterpiece toys ever released. I mean, over a decade later, it still holds up. So much so that Takara is literally on the verge of releasing a new Toon repainted version of this guy. Anyway, I'm guessing that MP13's success showed to Hasbro and Takara that it was perfectly okay to release Soundwave toys that transformed into music devices. And so we got Titan's Return Soundwave in 2016, who, while not yet a Walkman, actually this was just a retool of Titan's Return Blaster, was still on the right track. and was a headmaster. And after a quick hiccup with Seed Soundwave in 2019 that transformed into whatever this thing is, we finally got a straight-up Walkman Soundwave when this toy was retooled in 2021 for an exclusive Netflix release. I mean, by this point, the damn gates had opened and we were getting all sorts of Soundwave toys, from a cute core class version released the same year, a G.I. Joe crossover that had Soundwave transforming into the Dreadnought's Thunder Machine of all things, to Lego Soundwave. And of course, we can't leave out all of those amazing plastic renditions of live-action Soundwave, both satellite and car versions. Just kidding. Some of those are pretty cool, like this third-party masterpiece version XM1 Mista by New Age, released in 2020. And you can throw in all the numerous black toy repaints of Sound Blaster to the mix too. Speaking of which, allow me to go off on a little tangent, as while Sound Blaster is widely recognized as basically an upgraded version of Soundwave, it's worth noting that in the Netflix Siege Trilogy series, Sound Blaster is actually his own character, a ruthless and criminal-minded clone of Soundwave, created by Shockwave, who operates as a powerful mercenary, using his extensive connections with Cybertron's criminal networks to manipulate situations for personal gain. Sorry, I kinda got off track there, but let's reel things back and finish up strong with the Studio Series 86 version of Soundwave in 2025 that finally gives us a pretty definitive tune-accurate Soundwave for our Chug collections. And speaking of cartoon accuracy, as good as a job as MP13 was doing for masterpiece collectors, it admittedly fell short for those who preferred the more streamlined tune look. And so in 2022, a little-known third-party company called Robot Paradise served up that specific need. Wait, Robot who? Now sit back, kiddies, as this specific release has a little story to tell. Way back in 2006, during the baby years of third-party Transformers, an obscure company called Fans Toys announced their very first attempt at a masterpiece-styled Transformer, with a bunch of prototype pictures posted online. Dubbed Acoustic Wave, this was to be their masterpiece version of Soundwave. Not long after that, though, Takara announced the imminent release of their official version, and possibly fearing weak sales or worse yet, a lawsuit, Fans Toys immediately scrapped their plans for Acoustic Wave, and he became a mere footnote in the history of third-party Transformers. Until fast forward 13 years later, and by this time, Fans Toys had firmly established itself as one of the top, if not number one, third-party companies for masterpiece-style G1 Transformers. And they surprised everyone by announcing their plans to finally release an updated version of their Acoustic Wave. In an odd twist though, but most likely to misdirect any potential cease and desist orders to their main brand, the toy was released under a new company, Robot Paradise. But really, they're not fooling anybody. They also radically modified their original toyetic design and went for a full-on cartoon look. Again, most likely to differentiate themselves from MP13. That being said, Robot Paradise was thoughtful enough to include a number of swappable parts for those who prefer the more detailed toy look. And speaking of being thoughtful, don't you think it was thoughtful of me to give you the complete story of Soundwave's boss Megatron in one mega episode? That's all 4 of my Megatron stories neatly compiled into one video for your convenience. And that can be found here. Or if you want my latest story, you can check it out here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope to hear from you in the comments below. Go ahead and tell me your story.